Some secrets don't just hide the truth. They destroy everything you thought you knew about the people you love. This is the story of a family that fell apart because of lies. But the real question isn't what was hidden. It's why it stayed hidden for so long. Meet the Hargrove family from Cedar Falls, a small town in Minnesota where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay buried for long. At the center of this story is 17-year-old Daniel Hargrove. To his parents, Richard and Catherine, Daniel had become a stranger, a troublemaker, a disappointment. To his younger sister Emma, he was still her big brother, but even she didn't understand what had happened to him. It started 6 months ago. Daniel had always been the golden child, straight A student, captain of the soccer team, the kind of kid that parents bragged about at dinner parties. But then something changed. His grades dropped. He stopped going to practice. He started coming home late, sometimes not coming home at all. When his parents asked questions, he lied. When they pressed harder, he shut down completely. Richard, a construction company owner who prided himself on building things that lasted, watched his son crumble and couldn't fix it. Catherine, a high school counselor who spent her days helping other people's children, felt like a complete failure as a mother. They tried everything: grounding him, taking away his phone, family therapy. Nothing worked. Daniel just kept pulling away, and with every lie he told, the distance grew wider. Then came the night that shattered what little trust remained. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. Daniel was supposed to be at a study group. Instead, Richard got a call from the Cedar Falls Police Department. Daniel had been caught breaking into the old Morrison warehouse on the edge of town. No explanation, no apology. Just cold, defiant silence in the back of the police cruiser. Richard picked him up from the station, and the drive home was suffocating. Catherine was waiting at the front door, her face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. They sat Daniel down at the kitchen table, the same table where they had celebrated his acceptance to 3 different colleges just a year before. Now it felt like a courtroom. "What were you thinking?" Catherine's voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to yourself, but to this family? To your future?" Daniel stared at the table, said nothing. Richard slammed his hand down, making the salt shaker jump. "You're throwing your life away and you won't even tell us why. What happened to you? Who are you anymore?" Still nothing. Just that same blank expression that had become Daniel's default face whenever they tried to reach him. That night, Catherine cried herself to sleep. Richard sat in his garage until 3 in the morning, staring at the tools on his workbench, wondering where he had gone wrong as a father. And Emma, 13 years old and scared, listened to it all from her bedroom upstairs. The next morning, the decision was made. Daniel would be sent to live with his uncle in Montana for the rest of the school year. A fresh start. A chance to get away from whatever bad influences had corrupted him in Cedar Falls. Catherine presented it as an opportunity. Richard made it clear it wasn't optional. Daniel didn't fight it. He just nodded, packed his bags, and within 48 hours, he was gone. For the first 2 weeks, the house felt empty but peaceful. Catherine told herself they had made the right choice. Richard threw himself into work, trying not to think about the sun-shaped hole in their lives. Emma went quiet, spending most of her time in her room, but her parents were too exhausted to notice. Then Emma found the journal. Daniel's journal, tucked behind his bookshelf, probably forgotten in his rush to pack. She knew she shouldn't read it, but she was desperate to understand why her brother had changed, why he had pushed them all away, why he had let them send him to Montana without a word of explanation. What she found on those pages made her blood run cold, because Daniel hadn't been lying to protect himself. He had been lying to protect all of them. And the secret he was keeping? It was bigger and darker than anyone could have imagined. But here's what you need to understand before we go any further. Sometimes the person who looks guilty is just the one brave enough to carry the weight alone. Sometimes the villain in the story is actually the hero. And sometimes a family falls apart not because of what was said, but because of what was left unsaid. Emma sat on her brother's bed, holding that journal, and realized that everything her parents believed about Daniel was wrong. Every punishment, every harsh word, every moment of disappointment. All of it based on a lie they had created because the truth was too painful to see. She had a choice to make. She could put the journal back, pretend she never found it, and let Daniel continue to be the family scapegoat. Or she could do what he couldn't do for himself. She could tell the truth, even if it meant tearing the family apart all over again. Even if it meant exposing secrets that were never meant to see the light. What would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you burn down everything to save the one person everyone else had given up on? Because that's exactly what Emma was about to do. And once she spoke, there would be no going back. Emma didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The words in Daniel's journal kept replaying in her mind, each sentence more devastating than the last. She sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the journal open in front of her, reading passages over and over, trying to make sense of what her brother had been carrying alone. The entries started normal enough. Soccer practice, tests, weekend plans. But then, about 7 months ago, the tone shifted. Daniel's handwriting became rushed, almost frantic. The entries got shorter, more cryptic. He stopped writing about his own life and started writing about someone else's. Mom doesn't know. Dad can't know. If they find out, it'll destroy them. I have to fix this. I have to make it right. But how do you fix something that's already broken? How do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? Emma's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Who was Daniel trying to save? What had he discovered that was so terrible he couldn't tell their parents? She kept reading, searching for answers, but Daniel had been careful. He wrote in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. Saw him again today. He was worse. Way worse. I tried talking to him, but he just laughed at me. Said I was being dramatic. Said everything was under control. But it's not. I can see it in his eyes. He's drowning, and he's pulling everyone down with him. Him. Daniel was protecting someone. A guy. Someone their parents knew. Someone who was in trouble. But who? Emma flipped through more pages, her heart pounding. Then she found it. A name. Just once, written and then scribbled out so hard the pen had torn through the paper. But Emma held the journal up to her desk lamp, and in the light, she could make out the letters beneath the scratches. Uncle Marcus. Emma dropped the journal. Her mother's brother. The same uncle who had been at their house every Sunday for dinner. The same uncle who coached Little League and volunteered at the community center. The same uncle who everyone in Cedar Falls loved and respected. What had Uncle Marcus done? And why was Daniel protecting him? She picked up the journal again, forcing herself to keep reading. The entries became darker, more desperate. I found the pills in his truck. He swore he'd stopped. Swore it was just a rough patch after Aunt Lisa left. But there were so many. And the way he looked at me when I confronted him, like he wanted to hurt me, like I was the enemy. Pills. Uncle Marcus had a drug problem. Emma's stomach turned. She remembered how thin he'd gotten over the past year, how his jokes at dinner had become meaner, more aggressive, how he'd canceled plans at the last minute, always with some excuse. Her parents had chalked it up to the divorce, said he needed time to heal. But Daniel had seen the truth. I can't tell Mom. She's already dealing with so much at work. And Dad. He looks up to Marcus like a brother. If I tell him Marcus is using, it'll break him, so I'll handle it myself. I'll get Marcus clean. I'll fix this family before it falls apart. 17 years old, and Daniel had tried to save an addict by himself. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her stupid, brave, selfless brother had taken on something no teenager should ever have to face. And when it became too much, When Marcus's addiction got worse instead of better, Daniel had started unraveling too. The journal entries showed the progression. Daniel skipping soccer practice to check on Marcus. Daniel lying about study groups because he was really driving to Marcus's apartment to make sure he was still alive. Daniel's grades dropping because he was too exhausted, too stressed, too consumed with keeping his uncle's secret. Then came the entry that explained everything. Marcus asked me for money, said he needed it for rent. But I know what it's really for. I said no. He grabbed me, shoved me against the wall, told me I was ungrateful, told me he'd tell Mom and Dad lies about me if I didn't help him. I'm scared, not of him hurting me, but of what he might do to himself if I don't give him what he wants. Emma felt sick. Marcus had been blackmailing Daniel, threatening to destroy his reputation unless Daniel enabled his addiction. And Daniel, terrified of his parents finding out the truth about their beloved brother-in-law, had given in. That's where the money went. Their parents thought Daniel was wasting it on parties or drugs for himself, but he'd been draining his college savings account to feed Marcus's habit. And when the money ran out, Daniel had started stealing. Small things at first. Cash from his dad's wallet, his mom's emergency credit card. But it wasn't enough. Marcus always needed more. The warehouse, the night Daniel got arrested. Emma read that entry 3 times, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the journal. Marcus said there was equipment in the old Morrison warehouse, said we could sell it, get enough money to send him to rehab. He promised this would be the last time. Promised he'd get clean if I just helped him this once. So I went. I broke in. And he never showed up. He set me up. Let me take the fall while he disappeared. I called him 17 times from the police station. He never answered. And now Mom and Dad think I'm the criminal. Maybe it's better this way. At least they don't have to know the truth about Marcus. Emma closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. Daniel hadn't been destroying the family's trust. He'd been trying desperately to hold it together. Every lie he told, every crime he committed, every punishment he accepted without explanation. It was all to protect their parents from the truth about Marcus. And their parents had responded by giving up on him, by sending him away, by treating him like a lost cause when he was actually the only one in the family willing to sacrifice everything for the people he loved. Emma looked at her bedroom door. Downstairs, she could hear her mother in the kitchen, probably making tea before bed like she did every night since Daniel left. Her father was in his office, probably going through construction contracts, trying to distract himself from the son he thought he'd failed. They had no idea that Marcus was an addict, no idea that Daniel had been protecting them, no idea that they had punished their innocent son and defended the man who had manipulated and used him. Emma knew what she had to do, but the thought of it made her want to throw up. Because telling her parents the truth meant destroying their image of Uncle Marcus. It meant admitting that the man they'd supported through his divorce, the man they'd trusted around their children, was a drug addict who had corrupted their teenage son. It meant watching her mother's heart break all over again. It meant watching her father lose his best friend. It meant tearing open wounds that Daniel had sacrificed himself to keep closed. But it also meant bringing Daniel home. It meant clearing his name. It meant giving him back the life Marcus had stolen from him. Emma stood up, the journal clutched in her hands. Her legs felt weak. Her mouth was dry. But she walked to her door, opened it, and headed down the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached the kitchen doorway, she thought she might pass out. Catherine looked up from her tea, surprised to see Emma still awake. "Honey, it's late. You should be in bed." Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "Mom, we need to talk. You and Dad, right now." Catherine's face shifted from surprise to concern. She set down her mug and called for Richard. Within seconds, both parents were standing in the kitchen, looking at their daughter with a mixture of worry and confusion. Emma held up the journal. "This is Daniel's. I found it in his room. And when you read it, Everything you think you know about him is going to change. Richard frowned. Emma, we're not going to invade your brother's privacy by reading his personal journal. You have to. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Because Daniel isn't the one who betrayed this family. And the person who did? You've been defending him this whole time. Catherine stepped forward, her counselor instincts kicking in. Emma, sweetheart, what are you talking about? Emma took a shaky breath. Uncle Marcus is a drug addict, and Daniel has been covering for him for almost a year. The kitchen went silent. Catherine's face went pale. Richard's jaw clenched. Neither of them moved. Emma held out the journal. Read it. Read what Daniel went through. Read what Marcus did to him. And then tell me if you still think sending Daniel away was the right choice. Catherine took the journal with trembling hands. Richard moved to stand beside her, and together they began to read. Emma watched as the color drained from both their faces, watched as her mother's hands started shaking, watched as her father's eyes filled with a rage she'd never seen before. By the third page, Catherine was crying. By the fifth, Richard had to step away, his fists clenched, his breathing heavy. And by the time they reached the entry about the warehouse, about Marcus setting Daniel up, about their son taking the fall to protect them, Catherine collapsed into a chair, and Richard punched the wall so hard he left a dent. Emma stood there, watching her parents' world shatter, watching them realize they had failed Daniel in the worst way possible, watching them understand that the son they'd given up on had been the bravest person in the family all along. Catherine couldn't stop reading. Even as tears blurred her vision, even as her hand shook so badly she could barely turn the pages, she kept going. Every word was a knife. Every entry a reminder of how blind she'd been. How could she, a professional counselor who spent her days reading between the lines of troubled teenagers' words, have missed this? How could she have looked at her own son and seen a delinquent instead of a hero? Richard stood by the sink, his back to his family, his shoulders rigid. He'd stopped reading after the warehouse entry. Couldn't continue. The image of Daniel sitting in that police station, abandoned by the man he'd sacrificed everything for, calling Marcus 17 times with no answer. It was too much. Richard had built his entire business on the foundation of trust and reliability. He prided himself on being there for people. And his own son had needed him desperately, and he'd sent him away. Emma watched her parents process the truth, and for the first time in months, she felt the weight lift slightly from her chest. But it was immediately replaced by something heavier. Guilt, because she'd known something was wrong with Daniel. She'd seen the change in him, heard him pacing in his room at night, noticed how he flinched every time someone mentioned Uncle Marcus. And she'd done nothing, said nothing, just watched as her family tore itself apart. Catherine finally closed the journal and looked up at Emma with red, swollen eyes. How long have you known? Emma's voice was barely audible. I just found it tonight. I swear, if I'd known sooner, I would have told you. Richard turned around, and Emma saw something in her father's face that terrified her. It wasn't anger. It was devastation, complete and total devastation. My brother-in-law, Catherine's brother. He destroyed our son, and we helped him do it. Catherine stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. We need to call Daniel, right now. We need to bring him home and apologize and what? Richard's voice was sharp. Say sorry? Tell him we were wrong? How do we come back from this, Catherine? We sent him away. We called him a liar and a criminal. We gave up on him. What words could possibly fix that? The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma wanted to say something, anything to make it better. But there was nothing to say. Her parents were right. They had failed Daniel in a way that couldn't be fixed with an apology. They had chosen to believe the worst about their own son, rather than question the man they thought they knew. Catherine sank back into her chair, her face in her hands. I talked to him every day. Marcus. After Lisa left him, I checked on him constantly. Made sure he was eating, made sure he wasn't isolating. I thought I was helping him through his divorce. But he was high. Every conversation we had, he was probably high, and I didn't see it. You couldn't have known, Emma tried. But Catherine shook her head violently. That's my job, Emma. That's literally what I do for a living. I spot the signs, I recognize the patterns. And I missed it completely because I didn't want to see it. Because seeing it would mean admitting my brother is an addict. Would mean admitting I couldn't save him. Richard moved to the table and sat down heavily. When Daniel started lying to us, I thought he was becoming someone I didn't recognize. But the truth is, I didn't recognize my own son because I never really knew him at all. I knew the version of him that made me proud. The athlete. The honor student. But the real Daniel? The one who would sacrifice his future to protect his family? I never saw him until it was too late. Emma felt her own tears coming. She thought about all the times she'd been annoyed with Daniel over the past few months. All the times she'd rolled her eyes when her parents talked about his behavior. All the times she'd felt embarrassed to have a brother who was in trouble. She'd judged him too. They all had. Catherine looked at her husband. We need to tell the police. About Marcus. About what he did. Richard's expression hardened. We need to do more than that. We need to find Marcus and make him face what he's done. Emma's stomach dropped. Where is Uncle Marcus? I haven't seen him since Daniel left. Neither parent answered immediately. They exchanged a look that made Emma's blood run cold. Finally, Catherine spoke. He's been texting me, asking how Daniel is doing in Montana, asking if we think he'll be able to come home for Christmas, acting like he cares. The rage that crossed Richard's face was frightening. He's been checking to make sure his scapegoat is still gone, making sure Daniel is far enough away that he can't tell us the truth. Catherine grabbed her phone with shaking hands. I'm calling him. Right now. No. Richard's voice was firm. If we call him, he'll run. We need to go to his apartment, confront him face to face. And we need to do it now, before he has a chance to disappear. Emma stood up. I'm coming with you. Both parents turned to her. Catherine's motherly instinct kicked in immediately. Absolutely not. You're 13 years old. You're not going anywhere near. He manipulated Daniel. Emma's voice was stronger now. He used my brother. Threatened him. Let him get arrested. I need to see his face when you confront him. I need him to know that we all know what he did. Richard studied his daughter for a long moment. Then he nodded. She deserves to be there. Daniel protected us all from this. The least we can do is let Emma see justice happen. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she grabbed her coat. Fine, but Emma stays in the car. If Marcus is high, if he's dangerous, I'm not putting another one of my children at risk. 20 minutes later, they pulled up outside Marcus's apartment complex on the south side of Cedar Falls. It was a rundown building that had seen better days. Paint peeling, broken security gate. The kind of place Marcus never would have lived before the divorce, before the drugs. Richard killed the engine but didn't get out. For a moment, they all just sat there, staring at the building. Emma could see the light on in what she assumed was Marcus's apartment, 3rd floor, corner unit. She wondered if Daniel had stood in this same parking lot dozens of times, trying to work up the courage to confront a man who was supposed to be family. What do we say to him? Catherine's voice was small. What do we even say? Richard's jaw tightened. We tell him the truth. That we know everything. That he's going to rehab whether he wants to or not. And that if he ever comes near our family again, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man he really is. Catherine reached for the door handle, then stopped. What if he denies it? What if he tries to make Daniel look like the liar again? Then we show him the journal. Richard's voice was cold. We show him proof that we know every detail, every manipulation, every threat, and we make it clear that his choices now are rehab or prison. Emma watched her parents steel themselves for the confrontation. She'd never seen them like this. So united, so fierce, so ready to fight for Daniel. She wished her brother could see them right now, could see that they finally understood, that they were finally on his side. Catherine and Richard got out of the car. Catherine turned back, locked the doors. "Don't open them for anyone except us." Emma nodded and watched her parents walk toward the building entrance. They moved like soldiers heading into battle, shoulders back, steps determined. And for the first time since finding that journal, Emma felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. But as her parents disappeared into the building, that hope twisted into anxiety. What if Marcus wasn't alone? What if he became violent? What if he had a weapon? Daniel's journal had mentioned Marcus shoving him against a wall. If he'd been willing to physically threaten a teenager, what might he do to two adults accusing him of destroying their son? Emma pulled out her phone and opened her text messages. Her conversation with Daniel was still there. The last message was from 2 weeks ago. She'd sent him a photo of their cat. He'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. That was their entire interaction since he'd left. She typed out a message now. Her fingers trembled. "We know about Uncle Marcus. We read your journal. Mom and Dad are confronting him right now. We're bringing you home. You're not the bad guy. You never were." She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she hit send. The 3 dots appeared immediately. Daniel was typing. Emma's heart raced. What would he say? Would he be angry that she'd invaded his privacy? Would he be relieved? Would he even believe her? The dots disappeared. No message came through. Emma waited, staring at her phone, willing her brother to respond. But the screen stayed empty. Then she heard it. Shouting. Coming from the 3rd floor. Her parents' voices, raised and furious. And another voice, Marcus. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Defensive, aggressive, escalating. Emma's hand went to the door handle. She'd promised to stay in the car. But what if her parents needed help? What if Marcus? The apartment door flew open. Emma could see it from the parking lot. Richard stormed out onto the 3rd floor walkway, and Marcus followed, still yelling. Catherine was right behind them, her phone in her hand, apparently calling someone. The police, Emma realized. Her mother was calling the police. Marcus saw Catherine on the phone and lunged for it. Richard grabbed him, and suddenly the 2 men were grappling on the walkway. Emma's scream caught in her throat. She fumbled with the door lock, her promise forgotten. Her father was fighting with a desperate addict 3 stories up, and she couldn't just sit there. But before she could get out, other apartment doors opened. Neighbors emerged. Someone pulled Marcus away from Richard. Someone else helped Catherine. And within minutes, Emma heard the sirens. The police arrived. Marcus was cuffed. Catherine was crying and talking rapidly, showing officers something on her phone, probably photos of journal pages. Richard was pacing, his shirt torn, his face flushed with adrenaline. And Emma sat in the car, watching her family's dirty laundry become public, watching neighbors whisper and point, watching the man who had destroyed her brother get loaded into the back of a police cruiser. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. Just 2 words. Thank you. The police station was cold. Emma sat between her parents in the waiting area, watching officers move back and forth with files and coffee cups, their voices low and professional. It was 3 in the morning. The fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal, like they'd stepped into a nightmare and couldn't wake up. Catherine hadn't stopped crying. Not dramatic sobs, just a steady stream of silent tears that she kept wiping away with tissues Emma's father kept handing her. Richard sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight Emma worried he might crack a tooth. His knuckles were scraped from the altercation with Marcus. He'd refused medical attention. A detective approached them. Older woman, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes that had clearly seen too much. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Morrison and asked them to follow her to an interview room. The name Morrison made Emma's stomach turn, the warehouse Daniel had been arrested at. The detective's family probably owned it. This woman might have been the one to process Daniel's arrest. They sat around a metal table. Detective Morrison had Daniel's journal in an evidence bag. Catherine had surrendered it willingly, desperate to prove her son's innocence. The detective had been reading it for the past hour while they waited. I need to be clear about something. Detective Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. This journal provides context for Daniel's actions, but it doesn't erase the fact that he committed a crime. Breaking and entering is still breaking and entering, regardless of the motivation. Richard leaned forward. My son was manipulated by an addict. He was protecting his family. He was 17 years old and trying to save a grown man who should have known better. I understand that, Mr. Hargrove. And trust me, Marcus Webb is facing serious charges. Not just for the drugs we found in his apartment tonight, but for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, coercion, and potentially blackmail. But I need you to understand that Daniel will still have a record unless we can work something out. Catherine's voice was hoarse. What kind of something? Detective Morrison opened a folder. When we arrested Daniel, he refused to explain why he broke into that warehouse. Wouldn't name an accomplice, wouldn't provide any context. The prosecutor wanted to charge him as an adult because of his age and the severity of the crime. But your lawyer negotiated it down to juvenile charges with the agreement that Daniel would accept responsibility and complete community service. Emma felt sick. Daniel had protected Marcus even then. Even sitting in jail, knowing he'd been abandoned, he'd kept the secret. The detective continued. But now we have evidence that changes the entire picture. Marcus Webb essentially sent a minor to commit a crime on his behalf. That's a different story. With this journal and your testimony about Marcus's drug use and manipulation, we can petition to have Daniel's charges reduced or possibly dismissed entirely. Hope flickered in Catherine's eyes. Really? You can do that? I can recommend it to the prosecutor. Detective Morrison's expression softened. But there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered when I started pulling Marcus Webb's records tonight. The room went still. Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Marcus has been arrested twice in the past 8 months for possession. Both times in Hennepin County. Both times the charges were dropped because he entered a diversion program. But he never completed either program. He'd go to a few sessions, test clean, then disappear. Richard's face went pale. 2 arrests. How did we not know about this? Different county, different jurisdiction, and Marcus was careful. He used his ex-wife's address as his residence on the reports, probably to keep you from finding out. But here's what concerns me. The detective pulled out another document. The dates of those arrests align with entries in Daniel's journal. Your son knew about them. Catherine grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning the dates. Oh my God. This entry, where Daniel writes about bailing Marcus out, that was real. Daniel used his college fund to bail Marcus out of jail. $8,000. Richard's voice was hollow. Daniel withdrew $8,000 in March. Told us it was for a school trip to Washington, D.C. We believed him. Detective Morrison nodded slowly. Marcus manipulated your son into funding his legal defense and probably his drug habit. And based on these journal entries, he did it by threatening to tell you that Daniel was the one with the problem. Classic addict behavior. Projection and manipulation. Emma spoke up for the first time. Can we call Daniel now? Can we tell him he's coming home? The detective hesitated. That's the complicated part. Daniel is currently in Montana under an informal arrangement. He's not technically in the custody of the state. Your brother-in-law agreed to supervise him. But given what we now know about the circumstances of his departure, and the fact that he's a minor who was essentially forced to leave under false pretenses, yes, you can bring him home. However, Catherine's hopeful expression faltered. However what? Detective Morrison chose her words carefully. Daniel has been living with the belief that he's a criminal, that he's a disappointment to his family, that everything that happened was his fault. From my experience with teenagers in his situation, the psychological damage from carrying that kind of burden, especially when it's undeserved, can be severe. You need to be prepared for the possibility that bringing him home and telling him the truth might not immediately fix everything. Richard stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Emma could see his reflection in the glass. He looked 10 years older than he had this morning. What are you saying? That my son might not forgive us? I'm saying your son has been through trauma. He's been manipulated, used, abandoned, and forced to carry secrets that no teenager should have to carry. He protected you by sacrificing himself. And when he needed you most, you sent him away. The detective's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. That kind of betrayal, even unintentional, leaves scars. Catherine buried her face in her hands. What have we done? What have we done to him? Emma reached over and took her mother's hand. We're going to fix it. We're going to bring him home and make it right. But even as she said the words, Emma wondered if they were true. Could they make it right? Could any amount of apologies or explanations undo the fact that Daniel had faced his darkest moments alone? That he'd sat in a jail cell, abandoned by the man he'd tried to save and still kept the secret? That he'd accepted exile rather than tell the truth? Detective Morrison's phone rang. She excused herself and stepped out of the room. Through the small window in the door, Emma could see her talking animatedly, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something that looked like shock. When she came back in, her face was grim. That was Hennepin County. They've been investigating Marcus Webb for the past month. Apparently, he's been dealing. Not just using, but selling. They've been building a case against him, and were planning to arrest him next week. The room spun. Richard grabbed the edge of the table. Dealing? Marcus was dealing drugs? The detective nodded. And based on their investigation, he's been using Daniel's name, telling buyers he had a teenage runner who could make deliveries. When they asked for proof, he showed them pictures of your son, made Daniel look like his accomplice. Emma thought she might throw up. Marcus hadn't just manipulated Daniel. He'd framed him, set him up to take the fall if his dealing operation ever got busted. All those months Daniel spent trying to save Marcus, Marcus was actively destroying Daniel's life. Catherine stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Where is Marcus right now? What cell is he in? Because I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye and… Mrs. Hargrove, I understand you're angry. Detective Morrison's voice was firm. But Marcus Webb is in custody, and he's going to face significant prison time. What you need to focus on right now is your son. Call him. Tell him the truth. Bring him home. Richard pulled out his phone with shaking hands. It was 3:30 in the morning. Montana was 2 hours behind. Daniel would be asleep. But Richard didn't care. He dialed. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Emma held her breath. On the 4th ring, a groggy voice answered. Dad? Daniel sounded confused. Scared. Is everything okay? Richard's voice cracked. No, son, nothing is okay. But it's going to be. We know about Marcus. We know everything. And there was a long silence on the other end. So long that Emma thought the call had dropped. Then Daniel's voice came through, small and broken. You read my journal, Emma told us. And we confronted Marcus. And he's in jail, Daniel. He's in jail and you're coming home. Another silence. Then a sound that broke Emma's heart. Her brother, crying. Not quiet tears. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that he'd probably been holding in for months. Maybe longer. Catherine took the phone from Richard, her own tears flowing freely. Baby, I'm so sorry. We're so sorry. We should have seen it. We should have protected you. You tried to save all of us and we punished you for it. Daniel's voice was barely intelligible through the crying. I couldn't let you know. He said he'd tell you I was the addict. Said he'd make you think I was the dealer. I couldn't risk you believing him. We would never have believed him over you, Richard said, leaning close to the phone. Never. And the fact that we made you think we would? That we made you feel like you couldn't trust us with the truth? That's on us. That's our failure, not yours. Emma grabbed the phone. Daniel, it's me. I'm sorry I read your journal, but I'm not sorry I told them. You've been carrying this alone for too long. She heard her brother take a shaky breath. Emma, I missed you so much. Then come home. Emma's voice was fierce. Pack your stuff and come home. We're going to fix this. All of it. Detective Morrison cleared her throat softly. She'd been giving them privacy, but now she stepped forward. Daniel, this is Detective Morrison with the Cedar Falls Police Department. I want you to know that we're working to clear your record. What happened to you was not your fault, and the man responsible is facing justice. There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice, stronger now. Is he really in jail? Marcus is really in jail? Yes, and he's going to stay there for a very long time. Another long silence. Then Daniel said something that made everyone in the room freeze. Good, because there's something else you need to know about him. Something I didn't write in my journal because I was too scared. Marcus didn't just threaten me. He threatened Emma too. Emma's blood ran cold. What? Daniel's voice shook. He said if I didn't help him, if I told anyone the truth, he'd start coming after you next. Said you were getting to the age where you'd be useful to him. I didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it, I knew it was bad. That's why I took the fall for the warehouse. That's why I left without fighting. I had to get far away so he couldn't use me against you anymore. Catherine's face went white. Richard looked like he might punch through the wall. And Emma realized with horror that her brother hadn't just been protecting their parents. He'd been protecting her. From a predator who would have eventually turned his manipulation and exploitation toward a 13-year-old girl. Detective Morrison's expression hardened. Daniel, I need you to tell me everything Marcus said about your sister. Every word. And as Daniel began to speak, as he revealed the final piece of the nightmare he'd been living, Emma understood something that changed everything. Her brother wasn't just brave. He was the person who had saved her from something she hadn't even known she was in danger of. And he'd done it without hesitation, without hope of recognition or gratitude. He'd done it because that's who Daniel was, a protector, a guardian, a hero that nobody had seen coming. Daniel's flight landed in Cedar Falls 3 days later. 3 days that felt like 3 years. 3 days during which the Hargrove family learned things that shattered everything they thought they knew about the past year. Detective Morrison had kept them updated. The investigation into Marcus Webb had exploded into something far bigger than a simple drug possession case. When police searched Marcus's apartment more thoroughly, they found detailed records, names, dates, amounts. Marcus hadn't just been a user spiraling out of control. He'd been running a calculated operation, and Daniel's name was all over it. Richard sat in the detective's office, staring at printed text messages between Marcus and his buyers. Messages where Marcus described his nephew as his delivery boy. Messages where he promised Daniel could get drugs into places adults couldn't. High schools, youth sports events, college prep programs. None of it was true. Daniel had never delivered a single drug, had never even known Marcus was dealing. But Marcus had been building a narrative, creating a paper trail that would implicate Daniel if the operation ever got busted. The ultimate insurance policy. A teenage scapegoat. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when Detective Morrison showed them security footage from the Morrison warehouse. The night Daniel was arrested. The footage that had been considered irrelevant to the case because Daniel had been caught red-handed. Catherine watched the grainy video on the detective's computer screen. She watched her son approach the warehouse at 9:47 p.m. Watched him use bolt cutters on the chain lock. Watched him enter. and then, 3 minutes later, watched Marcus Webb pull up in his truck. Richard leaned closer to the screen. He was there. Marcus was there. Detective Morrison nodded. He parked around the corner, out of sight of the main road. Then he made a call. Watch the timestamp. At 9:53 p.m., Marcus made a phone call that lasted 42 seconds. 6 minutes later, a Cedar Falls patrol car pulled up to the warehouse. The officer who arrested Daniel. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. No, he didn't. Marcus called in an anonymous tip. Detective Morrison's voice was flat. Reported suspicious activity at the warehouse. Gave a description that matched your son. Then he drove away before the police arrived. Daniel never saw him. Never knew he'd been set up until he was already in handcuffs. Emma, who had insisted on being present for every update, felt rage boil through her veins. He planned it. The whole thing was a setup from the beginning. The detective pulled up another document. And it gets worse. The equipment Daniel supposedly broke in to steal, it didn't exist. The warehouse has been empty for 2 years. Marcus sent your son to break into an abandoned building, knowing there was nothing to take. The entire crime was manufactured to get Daniel arrested and create a record that would make him look guilty if anyone started investigating Marcus's operation. Richard stood up and walked out of the office. Emma heard him in the hallway, heard the sound of something hitting a wall. Her father's anguished roar echoed through the police station. Catherine just sat there, frozen, staring at the paused video of her son cutting through a lock, believing he was helping his uncle get into rehab, believing one more crime would save a life, never knowing he was being sacrificed. But there was more. Detective Morrison pulled up Daniel's phone records from the past year, the records that had been subpoenaed as part of the expanded investigation. And that's when they discovered the calls. Hundreds of calls between Daniel and Marcus. But the pattern was disturbing. Marcus would call Daniel late at night. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Calls that lasted 30, 40, sometimes 60 minutes. And when investigators pulled Marcus's location data, he wasn't at home during those calls. He was parked outside the Hargrove house. He was watching your house while he called Daniel. Detective Morrison pointed to the maps on the screen. Sitting in his truck down the street, watching your windows while he talked to your son. Making sure Daniel answered. Making sure he was compliant. Emma felt sick. That's why Daniel never slept. Why she'd heard him pacing at night. Marcus had been terrorizing him with phone calls while literally watching the house, making sure Daniel knew he could get to the family anytime he wanted. Catherine finally spoke, her voice hollow. Psychological torture. He was psychologically torturing our son for 9 months. The detective closed the files. 9 months of manipulation, threats, and surveillance. And Daniel endured all of it to protect you. To protect Emma specifically. Because Marcus had made it clear that if Daniel didn't cooperate, Emma would be next. The room fell silent. Emma thought about all those nights she'd complained about Daniel's weird behavior, about him being moody and distant, about him ignoring her when she wanted to hang out. He hadn't been ignoring her. He'd been protecting her, keeping distance so Marcus wouldn't see them together, wouldn't get ideas. Richard came back into the office, his eyes red. "When is my son landing?" Detective Morrison checked her watch. 2 hours, but Mr. Hargrove, there's something else we discovered. Something Daniel doesn't know yet. And I think you need to be prepared before you see him. Catherine's face crumpled. What else could there possibly be? The detective pulled up a final document. School records. We contacted Daniel's high school to get his attendance records for the investigation. His teachers reported that his grades dropped, his participation decreased. Standard stuff. But one teacher, Mrs. Patricia Holland, she told us something interesting. Emma knew Mrs. Holland. English teacher. Sweet lady who ran the drama club. Detective Morrison continued. Mrs. Holland said Daniel came to her in February. Told her he was dealing with a family emergency and might need to miss some classes. Asked if there was any way he could do extra credit to keep his grades up because he knew he was going to struggle. She said he seemed desperate, scared. She offered to help, gave him extensions on assignments, let him turn things in late. Richard frowned. So Daniel was trying to keep his grades up despite everything Marcus was putting him through. That's good, right? That shows he was trying. That would be good. Except Mrs. Holland said Daniel asked her something strange. He asked if she could keep their arrangement private. Specifically, he asked her not to mention it if his parents called or came in for conferences. He said he didn't want them to know about the family emergency. Catherine's brow furrowed. Why would he want to hide that from us? Because there was no family emergency. Detective Morrison's voice was gentle, or rather the emergency was Marcus, but Daniel couldn't tell Mrs. Holland that. What he was really asking for was a paper trail. He was making sure that if his grades dropped so badly that you pulled him out of school or sent him away, there would be a record of him trying, a teacher who could vouch that he'd asked for help. Emma's throat tightened. He was preparing for you to give up on him. Even back in February, he knew it was coming. Richard sat down heavily. He knew we'd eventually stop believing in him, so he tried to leave evidence that he'd tried, that he hadn't just given up. And there's more. The detective pulled up emails. Mrs. Holland kept the extra credit assignments Daniel submitted. She forwarded them to us. They're all journal entries, stories about teenagers dealing with impossible situations, having to choose between protecting their families and telling the truth, having to sacrifice their own futures for people they love. Catherine reached for the printed pages. Can I see them? Detective Morrison handed them over. As Catherine read, her hands began to shake. These aren't fiction. Every story, every character, it's all Daniel. He was writing about what he was going through, but disguising it as creative writing. Emma read over her mother's shoulder. One story was about a teenage boy who discovers his father is embezzling money from his company. The boy takes the fall, claims he stole the money for drugs, lets everyone think he's an addict to protect his father's reputation. Another was about a girl who covers for her mother's drinking by pretending she's the one crashing cars and breaking things. Story after story of kids sacrificing themselves for adults who didn't deserve it. And Mrs. Holland graded these. Richard's voice was incredulous. Gave him as. Never once thought to call us and say, hey, your son is writing disturbing content about parental betrayal? Mrs. Holland thought they were fiction, the detective said. Creative writing meant to explore complex moral themes. She told us she thought Daniel was a gifted writer with a sophisticated understanding of human nature. She had no idea he was documenting his own life. Catherine set the papers down. How did we miss this? How did an English teacher see more of what was happening to our son than we did? Because you were too close. Detective Morrison's voice was kind but firm. And because Daniel made sure you missed it. He protected you from the truth so effectively that even when he was screaming for help in these essays, you never heard it. Emma picked up one of the stories, the last one Daniel had submitted. It was dated a week before his arrest. She read the ending aloud. In the end, the boy realized that saving his family meant losing himself. But that was okay, because love isn't about being understood. It's about being willing to be misunderstood if it means the people you care about are safe. He'd carry the burden. He'd wear the shame. He'd be the villain in their story if it meant they could stay heroes in their own. And maybe someday they'd know the truth. Or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, he'd done what he had to do. And he'd do it again. The room was silent. Emma's tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink. Her brother had written his own ending, had accepted his fate, had made peace with being the villain. And they'd let him. Richard's voice broke. We're the villains. Not Daniel. Us. We did this to him. No. Detective Morrison was firm. Marcus Webb did this. He's the villain. You were victims of his manipulation just like Daniel was. The difference is Daniel saw what was happening and tried to stop it. You didn't see it because you weren't supposed to. That was the whole point of Marcus's plan. Catherine wiped her eyes. What do we say to him? When he walks off that plane, what do we possibly say? You tell him the truth. All of it. Let him grieve, and you let him process the fact that the sacrifice he made was for a lie. Because here's what Daniel doesn't know yet. Everyone looked at the detective. Marcus never intended to hurt Emma. That threat was fake. We interviewed Marcus's ex-wife. She confirmed that Marcus has never shown any inappropriate interest in minors. Never had any history of that kind of behavior. The threat against Emma was pure manipulation. A button Marcus knew would make Daniel do anything. Emma's world tilted. He was never going to hurt me. No. Marcus just knew that was the one threat that would absolutely control your brother. And he was right. The moment Marcus threatened you, Daniel stopped fighting, stopped trying to get out, just accepted whatever Marcus demanded. Richard's fists clenched. So my son sacrificed everything for a threat that was never real, for a danger that never existed. Detective Morrison nodded. And when you tell him that, when he realizes that his worst nightmare was manufactured, that the thing he gave up everything to prevent was never going to happen, it's going to destroy him all over again, so you need to be ready for that. Catherine stood up. We need to go. We need to get to the airport. They drove in silence. Emma sat in the back seat, watching the Minnesota landscape blur past, thinking about her brother stepping off a plane, expecting to see his family proud and relieved. Not knowing he was about to learn that his sacrifice had been for nothing, that he'd been a puppet in someone else's cruel game from the very beginning. When they pulled into the airport parking lot, Emma saw other people heading into the terminal. Families greeting loved ones, happy reunions, normal lives. She wondered if her family would ever be normal again, if Daniel would ever be able to look at them without seeing the people who believed the worst about him, without remembering that when he needed them most, they sent him away. They made their way through security and to the gate. The arrivals board showed Daniel's flight had landed. Any minute now, passengers would start coming through. Any minute now, Emma would see her brother for the first time in weeks, and she had no idea what to say to him. Catherine gripped Richard's hand. Richard stared at the door where passengers would emerge. Emma stood between them, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. And then the door opened. Passengers began filing out. Business people, families, college students. And then, at the back of the crowd, moving slowly like he wasn't sure he should be there, was Daniel. He looked different, thinner, older. His eyes scanned the crowd nervously, like he expected security to grab him, like he didn't quite believe he was really allowed to come home. And when his gaze finally landed on his family, the expression on his face made Emma want to sob. Relief, hope, fear, love, guilt, all of it mixed together in a look that said, I'm home, but I don't deserve to be, and I'm so sorry, and please don't send me away again. Catherine moved first. She ran to him, pushing through the crowd, and wrapped her arms around her son. Richard was right behind her. And Emma watched her brother collapse into their parents' arms, watched 17 years of trying to be strong finally break, watched the hero who had saved them all finally let himself be saved. But Emma also saw something else. She saw the way Daniel glanced around nervously, saw the way he flinched when someone walked too close, saw the way his hand instinctively went to his phone, like he was expecting a call from Marcus, expecting to be controlled even now. He didn't know yet. Didn't know about the recordings, the evidence, the full extent of Marcus's manipulation. Didn't know that the threat against Emma had been fake. Didn't know that his sacrifice, his noble, selfless sacrifice, had been based on a lie. And as her family stood in that airport terminal, holding each other and crying, Emma realized that telling Daniel the truth wasn't going to set him free. It was going to break him. Because heroes can handle being punished for doing the right thing. But they can't handle learning that the thing they died for never needed saving in the first place. They didn't tell Daniel right away. They couldn't. The ride home from the airport was filled with small talk and careful questions. How was the flight? How's Uncle Jim? Did you sleep okay in Montana? Nobody mentioned Marcus. Nobody mentioned the journal. They just existed together in the car, a family trying to remember how to be a family. When they pulled into the driveway, Daniel stared at the house like he was seeing it for the first time. Emma watched his face and saw what he was thinking. This is home. But do I still belong here? After everything I've done, everything they think I've done, is there still a place for me? Catherine must have seen it too because she touched his shoulder gently. This is your home, Daniel. It never stopped being your home. We're the ones who forgot that, not you. Inside, everything looked the same. Same furniture, same family photos on the walls. But it all felt different, heavier. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if healing was possible. Richard made coffee. Catherine set out cookies she'd baked that morning, a peace offering made of chocolate chips and desperation. Emma sat next to Daniel on the couch, close enough to touch but not touching, giving him space to breathe. Daniel held his coffee cup with both hands, staring into it like it held answers. I read Emma's text about the journal, about Marcus being arrested, but I don't understand what happened. How did you find out? Emma told him. About finding the journal, about reading it even though she knew she shouldn't, about showing their parents. Daniel listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I didn't want you to know. His voice was barely above a whisper. Any of you. That was the whole point. To keep you safe from knowing. Catherine sat down on his other side. Baby, you can't protect people from the truth forever. And you shouldn't have had to. The truth was ours to handle, not yours to hide. But Marcus said. Daniel stopped. Shook his head. It doesn't matter what he said now. He's in jail. It's over. It's not over. Richard's voice was firm but gentle. There's more you need to know. Things we discovered after you left. Things about Marcus. About what he did to you. And so they told him. Everything. The dealing. The setup at the warehouse. The surveillance outside their house. The fake threat against Emma. With each revelation, Daniel's face grew paler. His hands started shaking. The coffee cup rattled against the saucer until Emma gently took it from him and set it aside. When they got to the part about Emma never being in real danger, about Marcus manufacturing that threat to control him, Daniel stood up abruptly. No, that's not. He wouldn't. I saw it in his eyes. He meant it. Detective Morrison confirmed it. Catherine pulled out her phone, showing him the report. Marcus's ex-wife, his therapist, his history. Nothing indicated he would have ever hurt Emma. He knew it was your weakness. Knew you'd do anything to protect your little sister. So he exploited it. Daniel backed away from them, his breathing rapid. So everything I did. The money, the lying, getting arrested, leaving. It was all for nothing. It wasn't for nothing. Richard stood up. You were protecting your family from a predator. You were doing what you thought was right with the information you had. That's not nothing. That's heroic. But Daniel shook his head violently. Heroic? I destroyed your trust, ruined my future, got a criminal record, made you think I was a delinquent, all to stop something that was never going to happen. That's not heroic. That's stupid. I'm stupid. No. Emma's voice cut through the room. You're not stupid. You're 17, and you were up against a 40-year-old addict who spent months manipulating you. You did the best you could with what you knew, and you protected me. Even if the threat wasn't real, you didn't know that. You sacrificed everything because you thought I was in danger. That's not stupid. That's love. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I should have told you, should have trusted you to handle it. Instead, I tried to fix it alone and made everything worse. You made it better." Catherine's voice was fierce. "If you hadn't kept those journal entries, we might never have known the truth about Marcus. He'd still be out there, still using, still manipulating people. Your documentation is what's putting him in prison. Your courage to write it down, even when you couldn't say it out loud, that saved us all." Daniel sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands. "I don't know how to come back from this. How to be your son again, your brother. I don't know how to be the person I was before." Richard knelt in front of him. "Then don't be. Don't go back to being that person. Because that Daniel, the golden child who had everything figured out, he was never real. He was a mask you wore to make us proud. But this Daniel, the one who fights for his family, who carries impossible burdens, who makes hard choices even when they hurt, this is the real you. And this is the son we want." Emma took her brother's hand. "Remember that essay you wrote for Mrs. Holland? The one about the boy who sacrificed himself. You wrote that love isn't about being understood. It's about being willing to be misunderstood if it means the people you care about are safe." Daniel looked up at her, surprise in his eyes. "You read my essays. The police gave them to us." Emma squeezed his hand. "And Daniel, you were wrong. Love isn't about being misunderstood. Real love is about fighting to understand, about not giving up until you see the truth. We failed you because we stopped trying to understand. We saw what we expected to see instead of looking deeper. But we're looking now, and we see you, the real you, and we're not letting go again." Catherine wrapped her arms around both her children. "We're going to therapy, all of us, as a family, because we need to learn how to communicate better, how to trust each other, how to not let secrets grow until they destroy us. And you're going to finish high school here," Richard added. "We've already talked to the principal, explained the situation. Your teachers are willing to work with you to make up the credits you missed. Your arrest record is being expunged. You're getting a fresh start." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that broke Emma's heart. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm too broken to go back to normal? Then we'll be broken together." Catherine's voice was steady. "And we'll figure out a new normal. One where we're honest with each other, where we ask for help when we need it, where we don't try to be perfect, we just try to be real." Over the next few weeks, the truth of those words was tested. Daniel had nightmares, panic attacks when his phone rang, moments where he'd shut down completely, lost in memories of Marcus's threats. The family started therapy, and it was brutal. Sessions where they all cried, where Daniel raged at his parents for giving up on him, where Catherine and Richard had to sit with the knowledge that they'd failed their son when he needed them most. But slowly, painfully, they started to heal. Daniel returned to school and found that Mrs. Holland had told the truth to other teachers. They knew what he'd been through, knew he was a victim, not a criminal. Instead of judgment, he found support. His soccer coach asked him to rejoin the team. His friends, the real ones, welcomed him back without questions. Emma watched her brother rediscover who he was beneath the trauma, watched him laugh again, watched him relax in his own home. It wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, days where Daniel couldn't get out of bed, days where the weight of everything felt too heavy. But those days became less frequent. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Drug trafficking, coercion of a minor, fraud, and a dozen other charges. The judge made it clear that exploiting a teenager to build a criminal enterprise while simultaneously framing him was among the most despicable things she'd seen in her courtroom. Daniel didn't attend the sentencing, didn't want to see Marcus's face ever again. But Richard and Catherine went, sat in the courtroom, and watched justice happen for their son. 6 months after Daniel came home, Emma found him in the backyard late one evening. He was sitting on the old swing set they'd had since childhood, looking up at the stars. She sat on the swing next to him. "Thinking about anything specific?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about how different things could have been. If I just told you guys the truth from the beginning. If I trusted you to handle it. Would we have handled it well?" Emma asked honestly. 6 months ago. Before all this, if you'd come to us and said Uncle Marcus is a drug addict who's threatening me, would Mom and Dad have believed you? Daniel considered that. Probably not. They loved Marcus, trusted him. I had no proof, just suspicions and bad feelings. They would have thought I was making it up to get attention or cause drama. Exactly. So you did what you had to do with the information and resources you had. You were a kid trying to handle an adult problem. You weren't supposed to have all the answers. But I made so many mistakes. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. I kept secrets. I pushed everyone away. I let things get so bad that I ended up in jail. And you also saved us. Emma looked at her brother. Marcus was escalating. If you hadn't intervened, if you hadn't tried to get him help, who knows what he would have done? How many people he would have hurt? You stopped him. Yeah, it cost you a lot. But you stopped him. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, "Do you think I'll ever stop feeling guilty for what I put you all through? I don't know. But I think maybe that's okay. Maybe guilt means you care. Means you have a conscience. Marcus doesn't feel guilty. He still thinks he's the victim. But you feel everything. And that's what makes you good." They swung in silence for a while, the chains creaking softly. Then Daniel spoke again. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Something I couldn't say before." Emma's heart clenched. "When Marcus threatened you, when he said he'd come after you next, I didn't just believe him because he said it. I believed him because of the way he looked at you. At the last family dinner we had, before everything fell apart, you were helping Mom in the kitchen, and Marcus was watching you, and the look on his face. It wasn't Uncle looking at niece. It was something else. Something that made my skin crawl." Emma felt cold. "Even though Detective Morrison said the threat was fake, you saw something real. I saw something that terrified me." Daniel's voice cracked. Maybe it wasn't as immediate as he made it sound. Maybe he was years away from acting on it. But the potential was there, and I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk you. Emma reached over and took her brother's hand. "Thank you for protecting me, even from something that might never have happened. Thank you for caring enough to sacrifice yourself." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You're my little sister. I'd do it again. Maybe differently, maybe smarter, but I'd still do it. I know. And that's why you're my hero." They sat together until the stars came out fully, until Catherine called them in for dinner. And as they walked back to the house, Emma realized something profound. Her family had been broken, shattered into pieces that seemed impossible to put back together. But they were doing it. Slowly, imperfectly. But they were rebuilding. At dinner that night, they laughed. Real laughter, not forced or fake. Daniel told a story about Montana. Emma complained about her algebra teacher. Catherine and Richard shared a look that said, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in almost a year, the Hargrove family felt like a family again. Later, as Emma was getting ready for bed, she heard a soft knock on her door. Daniel stood in the hallway looking uncertain. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He sat on the edge of her bed. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for shutting you out, for making you feel like you didn't matter. You always mattered. You were the reason for everything. I know that now." Emma sat next to him. "And I'm sorry I didn't see what you were going through. I was so caught up in my own life that I missed all the signs. You were 13. Daniel's voice was gentle. "You weren't supposed to be responsible for seeing signs. That was Mom and Dad's job. And mine was to trust them enough to ask for help. We all failed each other in different ways. But we're fixing it now. That's what matters." Emma leaned her head on her brother's shoulder. "Daniel, do you think you'll ever trust people again? After what Marcus did?" Daniel thought about that. "I think I'm learning that trust isn't about believing people will never hurt you. It's about believing they'll stay, even when things get hard." Marcus left. He set me up and disappeared. But you guys, when you found out the truth, you came for me. You fought for me. That's real trust. And yeah, I think I can learn to trust that again. Good. Because I'm never letting you carry anything alone again. If you're struggling, if you're scared, if someone threatens you, you tell me. Deal? Deal. Daniel hugged his sister. And Emma, if you ever need me, if anything ever happens, you tell me too. No more secrets, no more secrets. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about everything her family had been through. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, the pain of watching someone you love sacrifice themselves for a danger that wasn't even real. But she also thought about the healing, the slow, difficult work of rebuilding trust, the courage it took to be vulnerable after being hurt. And she realized that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that makes you stronger. Her family had been destroyed, but from the ashes they'd built something better, something real, something that couldn't be broken by lies because it was founded on truth. Daniel had destroyed his family's trust, but in doing so, he'd also revealed what real trust looked like. Not blind faith, not assumption, but the willingness to fight for understanding, to dig for truth, to refuse to give up on someone even when it's easier to walk away. His sister had revealed the secret that changed everything. But the real secret wasn't about Marcus or drugs or manipulation. The real secret was that love isn't perfect. Families aren't perfect. People make terrible mistakes and hurt each other and fail spectacularly. But if you're brave enough to face the truth, strong enough to forgive, and committed enough to rebuild, you can turn destruction into redemption. And sometimes the teenager who destroyed everything is actually the one who saved it all.